On behalf of the organizers of the Spring Series of Forum in Literary Studies, I would like to welcome you virtually in the Institute of the Czech Literature and thank you all for joining us today. As you probably already know, we dedicated the spring sessions and meetings to current research on culture dissent in East Central Europe before 1989. And researchers from all over the Europe who deal with this topic are from the year 2017 connected within the cost action new exploratory phase in research on East European cultures of dissent. Our guests will tell you more about it in a moment. Now I am delighted to welcome among us Dr. Jessie Lebov, who is also the vice chair of this action and a resident fellow in the Center for Media, Data and Society and a researcher in the Literary Theory Department of the Institute of Literary Studies at the Edward Laurent Research Network. At Central European University, she worked as a member of the Digital Humanities Initiative and the Text Analysis Across Disciplines Initiative. She was a co-editor of the book Samizdat, Tamizdat and Beyond, Transnational Media During and After Socialism, and her most recent book project, Transatlantic Central Europe, will be presented in our forum next time. Our second guest is Dr. Piotr Včišlik, is a grant holder, scientific representative of the Action, assistant professor and deputy director of the Digital Humanities Center at the Institute of Literary Research of the Polish Academy of Sciences. He has published on the history of dissident political thought and dissident media and is currently developing a data-driven approach in that area. And he also cooperates a lot with our team of Czech literary bibliography. Jessie and Piotr suggested for our forum special format of presentations, and in 2 sessions they will discuss their interests, research and books. And today Jessie Lebov will ask Piotr Včišlik about samizdat social media in Poland and his forthcoming book related to this topic. So Jessie and Piotr, thank you so much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting us, especially for indulging us in this bizarre format we've decided to present in. It'd be much more straightforward and typical, I think, for us both to just present our books, but we've been in dialogue with each other for a long time, so we thought it would be useful and interesting if you actually heard us talk to each other, and also more fun, frankly, which is part of what's at stake here. When you've been in dialogue for someone with a long time, it's really fun to talk to them about their book. So here's the plan. I have only 3 basic questions for Piotr, but before we get into them, I'd like to work a little bit with the lexicon in his book, which I think a lot of us here, names I recognize certainly, are familiar with, and specifically what he's doing with his rhetorical intervention. And that will serve as the introduction to the whole project. After that will come my 3 questions, which I hope will kind of provoke him a little bit and perhaps set up some areas of contention and disagreement. And then we're going to leave some time at the end for questions and discussion. So I'm just going to jump into it then. First, I should read the title of your book because it's not so obvious. There's a lot going on with the title. And, we make up these titles in fits of narcissism, I think. I did anyway, thinking that everything rests with the title. But in Piotr's case, I think everything does rest with this title. I really do. And let me explain why. My PowerPoint just crashed. Piotr, can you give us your title and exactly? Do you know it off the top of your head?
Yeah, I just wanted to send in the link to the the book as it shows itself in the Routledge catalog, so you can also see where I just need to find the. Yeah, I just need to find the.
Oh, I can put it up if you want.
Oh, it's here. Okay. So the book is called Dissident Legacies of Samizdat Social Media Activism, Unlicensed Print Culture in Poland, 1976-1990.
Okay,
and
listen, hold on.
I need to stress though that this is a kind of like an X version of the title, and before the manuscript was accepted, I was not in a very good position to argue with the publisher, but actually this is almost what like the publisher thought would be the right title for the book. So if you appreciate it, that means like they have good editors.
Okay, so what did you want to call it?
Well, I wanted to call it License because this is how my doctoral dissertation was titled, on the basis of which this book came.
I remember that about there was a draft about it. That's right, Licensed.
But then many people advised. There's a point to why it's called it was called License, but then many people advised against it, telling that they would just bring the discussion it's kind of like if they decide to buy a book on the basis of the title, they would probably think the book is about something else.
So let's get into it. I want to get the words up that it. So we have these words like samizdat, drugi obieg, second circulation. I'm putting them in the chat. We all kind of probably are familiar with them in English. We use this term parallel polis sometimes. Gray zone of activity. What else am I leaving out here? Underground publishing. These are kind of the terms we might expect, right? And then your term, first term I want you to talk about is samizdat social media. I'll put it in quotes. It's in the title. It's thematized throughout the first half of the book. So can you explain what that means and how you're using it?
Okay, so the book has two central questions. One of them is the Hirschman question, to which we'll probably come back later. And then the second question is the Lenin question. And the Lenin question goes like this. I mean, everybody who was kind of growing up under socialism knew that, the press is not only the propagandist and the agitator, but it's also the organizer. And I thought that when you think deeply about this kind of famous definition by Lenin, you can actually extract what is genuine about samizdat as it emerged in Poland, but not only in Poland, in certain European countries in the 70s. Because what Lenin how you can read this famous line is that by being a press, through its organizational form as press, a print culture projects a kind of political idea, and what Lenin had in mind was, a central party organ, like one huge newspaper who would, be strong, who would be resilient against the forces of the Tsarism, but one newspaper and not 100, bulletins run by armchair revolutionaries. And the central organ was important because its growth would project the growth of the revolutionary force of socialism. So the first thing you have to rethink is why we had kind of like this, like not only hundreds, but actually thousands of armchair revolutionaries producing underground prints in Poland. Why it took this form, and so like the first contrast, like why I call it social media, because it's kind of it's a something distinct from from mass media press form. And the second thing is that because I wanted to kind of tap into this debate on from samizdat to internet, because I think there is a lot of things to be kind of straightened out there. So there's like a negative way of, not a good way of connecting samizdat and social media, and this normally happens in this neoliberal techno-optimist frameworks, which we know also from your book, and I think we're going to kind of discuss it again in a week. But it generally goes like this: that in the sense that we imagine there is something like a Cold War doctrine of the free flow of information, and as long as you kind of provide technical requirements for the free flow of information, be it supporting samizdat or like internet, social media, then what you will get in return is informed citizens and pressure towards democracy. And what we know, like one thing we already know, is that it doesn't work like this. And we have authors like Evgeny Morozov and McKinnon who wrote beautiful books about it. What I wanted to add in my intervention was that it's actually also false rendering of the political media fantasy that was organizing the world of samizdat, in the sense that what this internet the samizdat to internet narrative exposes is this kind of like a mass media fantasy.
Technological determinism is what we call it, saying that just because you have this mechanism in place, this will happen. And I just thought about it. If you were in literary studies, I put into the chat, you could have put this little ist in there, because in this explanation I really heard it, that what you're talking about is social, not just as we use it as a gloss on how media works now, but actually social in a deeper sense, that it constructs the social reality. The other term I really wanted you to get at before we get into the questions the book asks, and it is a question the book asks, is why unlicensed, in this sense, print culture, instead of all those other things? Just explain what you mean there.
Yeah, it's why I call it like kind of the unlicensed print culture. This is kind of the phrase, or unlicensed media activism. I mean, it's just a matter of perspective. I was not very orthodox about how I used the other terms that you mentioned before, like the drugi obieg or the samizdat. Some authors put a great emphasis on what that the unlicensed print culture in Poland was not a form of samizdat, because samizdat sensu stricto means a primitive division of labor. It means kind of chain typing form of communication, whereas like everything in Poland, everything was kind of bigger, more advanced, more sophisticated, and so on and so forth. But for that, I mean, this is not part of my argument. I think the argument is not entirely true, but why I used the word unlicensed is because of the political polysemy of the word license, which plays a tremendous role in this book, because this book is not only a book in media studies, it's also a book in intellectual history and intellectual history of dissident political.
I would actually put it differently. I would say it's a book on the political philosophy of dissident thought, even more so than the intellectual history, because I think it's more of an intervention into how these concepts intersect with political ideas than simply how it connects to different intellectual movements. But we'll get into that. I just want you to frame one more thing, the Hirschman question. Can you just introduce that briefly? Because it does frame the book, to set it up for us, and then we'll get into the politics.
Yeah, so the Hirschman question is really one of the apart from the Lenin question, is the central question of this book, and this is the question of what made dissent worth the trouble, and it's called a Hirschman question because in the mid 60s, a popular strand of analyzing politics was like with the kind of like with Mankur Olson as one of its proponents, was saying basically that even in the absence of a repressive regime, political passivity is a rational choice. It's just a rational choice because, as you know, like the rational choice, or the cost benefit calculus between getting involved on behalf of matters of public concern is the greater cost that waiting that somebody does it for you. This is what Mankur also said. And then 68 happened, right? And writing after 68. Hirschman, who I think was a kind of a genius thinker, was saying that this is the case where the logic of collection action goes kind of contrary to what Mankur also was saying about the logic of collective action, and somehow in 68, like the cost is mutated into benefits, and Hirschman was saying that this is the key question of politics, right? How it's not how to kind of make political involvement more rational, but how understand that kind of that almost magical mutation on why people get involved in politics without kind of clear rational, like kind of rational calculus of benefit.
I'm going to put one of your most elegant sentences on this topic in the chat. Again, this is what it would have been in the PowerPoint, but it's just to show people the kinds of framing questions you're using, and people can kind of digest this. The question of dissident license, and you hear that word again that Piotr likes, the unruly creativity of civic disobedience, the liberty to act unbound by both instituted authority and by the common sense of what is possible and desirable to pursue. Do you like how when I said that, it sounded like I was saying it instead of Piotr? That's my trick. But frankly, all of you guys that have spent some time with Piotr know that if he talks for more than 5 minutes, something creative and unusual is going to come out of his mouth. I mean, no matter what the topic is. But just my advertisement for this book, it's like all of that, sometimes chaotic, but often very orderly and like extremely logical thought, but distilled into book form, distilled into chapter form and into quote form. So I'm going to be cutting out questions from this book for a long time. Okay, now let me jump into one of the key questions, because I certainly want this to be part of the conversation and maybe part of the Q&A. So one of the interventions of this book that I find most valuable is another kind of determinism. It's about the democratic determinism that a lot of people find in the solidarity movement. And one of the things I want Piotr to kind of wrestle with now is what the link is between the press system that he describes, and it really is a system, and the different let's say, modes of democratization that were taking place. Let's just start with the early Solidarity period. So 70s leading up to the Solidarity Carnival of 80-81. So can you just talk about what the link is and how you're trying to connect those things with what you call a democratic mode of operation?
Well, I think like perhaps focusing on solidarity, I thought it would be useful to try to go beyond this kind of like both the Cold War framing of solidarity and a newer social movement theory-based approach, which with all the novelties that they introduced, they kind of inherit from the Cold War era this assumption that this was kind of that this acted as a more or less unified movement, or that the cleavage between solidarity and the state was much more important than what was happening inside the movement. And even though I agree that that was the most important cleavage, I mean, don't get me wrong. What I'm saying that the Cold War has been won, so we can actually focus on these cleavages because they are productive. And the way I try to frame the tensions that existed between the solidarity movement, or more precisely between the solidarity officialdom, its leadership, and the trade union press, is in terms of counter-democracy. And now counter-democracy is a concept that I take from Pierre Rosanvallon, and it doesn't mean contrary to democracy. But it encapsulates all those strands of thinking about democracy in terms of mistrust, of institutionalized mistrust. There are political philosophers who say that like trust is most important for having a functioning democracy, and there are others who say no, it's all, and Rosanvallon is more, it's all about kind of functionally organizing mistrust, like providing mechanism outside of the formal division of powers and so on and so forth, for citizens to be able to exercise democratic oversights over the over the powers they delegate to officials. And in my chapters, there are 3 chapters in the book about solidarity, and I focus. I try to pitch that like solidarity is kind of like it's a movement that was huge, so it's very difficult to kind of to define ideologically. But what I pitch in my book is that it was a counter-democratic movement par excellence. But at the same time, I try to show that there was a prefigurative dimension to its operations, in the sense that what solidarity had on its banner is the kind of is control, right? Social control of communists. They didn't. I mean, like they, of course, like kind of like this kind of self-limited revolution is again a very complicated matter, but in its official discourse, it was not about kind of taking power away from the communists. It's about kind of social or civic control over the government, and this is what was on the banner. But it had a repercussion at the same time. It had a repercussion on how this movement was getting organized internally. Because if you're saying that, you know, social control is the most important thing about democracy, then you don't want to, you know, you want to show in your internal organization that you enshrine the same values in how you kind of go about practicing, you know, democracy within your own movement. And this is where the press saw their mission and their role, and up to and here's why again, like this, the unlicensed is the word, because the polysemy of the word license also contains the word licentiousness, which is freedom that is used unresponsibly, right? And this was increasingly the perception of the Solidarity leadership, that the press, the trade union press, is acting irresponsibly in many ways. First, that it kind of it introduces you know, like this kind of because every idea of democracy as oversight has this potential of infinite regress, which I identify with the you know, the antique poet Juvenal's verse, right? Who will guard the guardians, who watches the watchers? That's the, I think, the English translation. And the point is that, you know, like, if Solidarity watches the government and the press is watching Solidarity, then the question is, what's the mandate of the press, right? And over that, so I was trying to follow how this dynamics released by the you know, like, again, the third question. It's a book. You can tell this book in question. So let's say you have this juvenile question about who watches the guardians, and in my chapters about Solidarity, this is how I, you know, like, this is the late motive, is how press, the trade union press understood its role, and how kind of it was diverging from the way the Solidarity leadership was understanding the role of their press, and this was also connected to their failure to exercise social control through the licensed media, because in these chapters I also connect, you know, like the unlicensed media and the licensed media in the sense that I tell the story of the frustrated attempts to actually you know, like to Solidarity to get access to licensed communication, and this kind of move against the autonomy of the press was a kind of byproduct of this frustrated attempt to get access to licensed media.
Okay, and also I'm just going to mention it and not let you talk about it because that'll be too long a digression. You also employ this term surrogate media, but not to refer to necessarily foreign radio broadcasting like we usually use it, but rather to refer to uses of media within Poland that are replacing the official. So 2 comments, and then we're going to switch to this more, let's say, prognostic element at the end. So one comment is about this license or licentious media out of control aspect, which comes in even stronger in the post-martial law era when you have this enormous explosion, which I will permit you to talk about if you want to, because I know it's one of the things on your mind. But that's where we could see a very strong, I think, analogy with social media and its understanding today. Whereas on the one hand, it has great potential to communicate a message and to amplify a message, but then the obvious problem with it that a lot of us face when we're trying to analyze it is that it very quickly goes out of control and has great license beyond what it's designed to do. And it captures a little bit of that dynamic of media taking on a social life of its own. So not a technologically determinist one where it therefore has to be free. So it creates democracy wherever it goes, but rather in a social sense, it creates communities wherever it goes, and those have a life of their own. One comment which we can either respond to now or leave for the question and answer is I wanted to make a comparison with Jonathan Bolton's book for the following reason. There is something similar in the project in that in Bolton and Worlds of Dissent is trying to insist on a methodology of context building and to move away from the kind of prosopography and to move into the context of the social world and the everyday life. But he's doing it, I think we could all agree, with literary culture and with the artistic culture and medium around that world of dissent. And so I think probably people here are familiar with that book, or others like it. And what Piotr is doing is similar in the gesture, except that the world that he's taking on is the media world. And with it, I would argue, a different kind of social dynamic that arises. So one of the things that happens is that the press, and especially after martial law, this is the narrative that Piotr is taking, starts to create meanings far beyond what solidarity originally meant. And that is actually where some of the chaos and the interest emerges. And so the prefigurative politics that are very clearly announced in the pre-martial law era become much, what you use it, polysemic, they become much more diverse and start to contradict themselves in the post-martial law period. And it's because of this tendency of the media to go viral. Those are just comments, and he might disagree with me, but I do kind of want to make sure we leave some time for the so what questions that we ask at the end of the book. So Piotr, do you want to respond briefly to that? Can you do it in a couple minutes, or do you want to just jump into the questions at the end?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say it's, I think like the book as a whole, it's true that it's kind of, you can call it like kind of like a very asymptotic narrative. I mean, basically it's kind of, it traces where some is that, because it's kind of the prefigurative politics as a principle of political action, as a philosophy of political action, was sometimes in the foreground of the movement, and sometimes it was kind of pushed out to the margins. And actually the early martial law is the moment when it's kind of up again. So it's the whole concept of underground society, as opposed to the general strike strategy that was kind of that was the big debate in the aftermath of the imposition of the martial law. It's it's successful because the press is there, and it's not that like Zbigniew Wujak and Viktor Kulewski invented it, or they told somebody to do it. It's the other way around. It's kind of it is because it took track with reality, because it so much was resonant with what was actually a spontaneous development. So about Bolton, I think the big difference, I hugely appreciate Bolton's book and his overall kind of way of building the narrative, and the idea of where that dissent, that you should get away from this poster image of dissident as the lonely righteous figure, and that the dissent thrives in particular social words. And this, our task as historians of the period, is to kind of render the texture of this world more and more complex. But then again, and this also applies to Anne Komaromi, who is the other big, both an influence and interlocutor and the milestone in the Samizdat studies, right? Like it's the, in both Bolton's case and Anne Komoromi case, I try to kind of to take note of their contributions, but bring the political back in, because what I don't well, I see. I mean, I saw this. I guess in a way it was liberating, right? Like they, in the context when they were writing in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was liberating to say, you know, well, we don't have to deal with with political dissent anymore, and that's good and refreshing, because this is all we've been talking about, and it was a great moment to to excavate all this kind of postmodern elements and all this anti-political. I mean, not really anti. I mean, because that's another discussion. But yeah, but I don't want to digress. But this kind of, you know, like turning their backs against politics. And what I want to do in my book is to to bring political back in, but without succumbing to this the you know, to these dichotomies or to these polarities of analyzing
that, my friend,
politics.
Is the clearest you've ever put it, I've got to say, because you've actually, what you've done is historicized the work on the topic, putting yourself in that story. And I would argue that this is that we need to re-engage. It's like the 90s were kind of a time when we could let go of that type of political engagement. And not just that, but the whole, like you put it, the whole conversation about Samizdat was dominated by this Cold War triumphalist approach and all of this determinism. And so, yes, they did us a favor by releasing us from that. But now we need to re-engage, and we need to figure out how. And that's my segue into the last question, which is, okay, so there are a lot of implications in the relations that you set out between social media and activism and democratic practices. And at the very end of your book, is that we do at the end of our books, this is what we do at the end of books, is we wonder what the implications could be. And what my thinking was, I'm going to try this and see if you buy it. So you come up with this concept, I should put it into the chat because it was in the PowerPoint, that a theorist in Calvas comes up with about extraordinary moments. And it almost reminded me of like an Agamben style state of exception, but it seems to have more to do with a phase of disobedience and resistance to not just authoritarian control, but to democratic control too. And what you're asking in the end of this book is whether that extraordinary state had to be in place to answer this Hirschman question that you say in the beginning. And my question for you now, and I'll leave it, I'll shut up and let you talk about all of this, is where can we see those dynamics in action? Can you see those tensions in action today in any of the resistances to authority around the world, or in any of the dynamics of how social media is evolving in its activist moments? Period.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I guess that's you're asking many things at once. One of my objectives in this book, and that was one of the actually genuine surprises and kind of like almost like a moral imperative to deal with the situation, is that when there are many excellent books on which my book draws, when they, you know, like the monograph length narratives about Samizdat and Poland, they all you know, end in 89, and they all more or less say that, well, like the mission accomplished, like this was the natural end. We have, you know, the communism is vanquished, and we all go home. But then when you read you know, that you know, like some Samizdat journals did not end their course in 89. They were running at least until when censorship was abolished in Poland, and it was abolished rather late because it was April or May 1990, right? So like on the, almost a year after the June elections, and there's a lot of specific kind of disillusion in how the first months of the transitions are evolving, and I found it very important to capture the kind of the core of this disillusion because it was something different than you usually get, right? Like all the you have the post-dissident narrative about the Trump, like and then you have the contender narratives about the betrayal of the revolutionary betrayal, and their narrative is nothing of the sort. What they are arguing instead, that they were actually existing forms of democracy that were actually already in place in the 80s, and that there is no kind of space for them in these traditional realities, and both for the economic reasons, because the way the Balcerowicz therapy was planned, but also for political reasons. The way we again imagine a transition of democracy is this kind of the thing is that kind of you have like here you have totalitarianism and here you have democracy, and it's kind of linear way of going from one to the other. Like democratization, augmenting is just like augmenting the democracy. But why I kind of understand, and here I try to frame this as a democracy, transition politics as a politics of exception, that in some places, like building democracy meant less democracy and not more, in a sense that it was a generation, maybe it was a generational thing, or maybe it was just like kind of like because of the imperative of like the imperative of evolutionism, that politics was very weary of the democratic effervescence that can have like unintended consequences, about rocking the boat, right? And in many cases, like the like samizdat activism was on the side of of the boat rockers, and on the other hand, the samizdat activists in their own side had a very kind of traumatic experience in times of solidarity, not only because they went into the open and they got busted under the martial law, and this is why they were kind of very careful about kind of revealing everything again, but also with this contentious relationship they had with the solidarity leadership. So I wanted to reconstruct this story and how it now let me end with how it changes the way I started to see social media activism in our own days. There is a very important first everybody was in love with this discourse has been around for quite some time, and at first it was very optimist and now it's very very pessimist, right? And one of the best books of this kind of this genre is the Zeynep Tufekci book, Twitter and Tear Gas. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the name correctly. I'm sorry. It's a great. I think it's one of the best books about the topic. And basically, to cut the long story short, what what she says that is that what is the effect of digital affordances of the digital media on social movement organizing? She has this beautiful, very brilliant bodybuilding metaphor there. It's like, movements using social media is like kind of a bodybuilder on steroids, in the sense that you don't grow organically. The movement kind of grows very quickly, but it doesn't have, like it only has the muscle, but it doesn't have the spinal cord, it doesn't have the brain, and so on and so forth. So like it grows quickly, and this is why it doesn't, institutionalize itself. Activist doesn't learn to take compromises. It doesn't and then even though kind of protests are very spectacular, there's no time to do this less spectacular job of kind of providing resilience to the movement. And in a way, and what she says is that it's just like kind of like she treats it like an infantile disease. What like this kind of this democratic radicalism, and she connects it to this kind of to this fast pace of growth. And then in one of her recent interventions, Barbara Falk, who I admire a lot, so that one of the avenues to which we can actually appreciate the legacy of samizdat social media activism, saying that this is the model of kind of, like if the kind of, if this network protest is kind of it's social movements on steroids, then this is kind of organic food, Yeah. In a way that it grew over time, but it built these connections of trust and everything, and this is why it's much more lasting legacy, and that we should forget about. One of the op-eds titles which I like most was just like kind of forget Facebook, bring back samizdat. That's the okay. The thing. But what what I say, my book, how it problematizes this is that it shows is that this democratic radicalism is not necessarily lost as the movement mature. I mean, they are both right that it was kind of working like with physical media and physical people and growing over time gives you more resilience. That's true, but then you don't necessarily lose this prefigurative dimension of movement politics, and this is why it's not. But maybe it's not a bad. Maybe it's not a bad thing.
Okay. We leave it there because you made me look bad because I left 15 minutes, but that didn't happen. So let's go to the questions and try to get some interlocutors beyond me, because I can talk to you anytime, and we do. So who else would like to know more about this book or what Piotr meant in any of those spectacular rhetorical displays? Lots of questions down here. Jan is at it. Oh, see, we skipped the question about the primary text and the resources. You see, Piotr?
Yeah, I'm reading Jan Matonocha's question.
So I skipped that for lack of time, but go for it now, or any of it.
Okay, so Jan writes about how I want to take distance from from, if you write in the chat, I just like it, I'm not able to read it. Yeah, I mean the way I mean, first of all, so Jan asks how do I want to take distance from this you know, like neoliberal grand narrative of triumphalism, and that's what I want to target. Then the second thing is, what are the primary text or media of the book, and then the third question is, what makes the narrative of your book asymptotic? Okay. So in I'm actually like, I don't, you know, the neoliberal is not, it's not something I focus on in this particular book. We do that with Michał Kopacek in our other books, Thinking Through Transition. But what I would say is that this kind of this idea that you know, that I want to historicize the transition by showing that starting, you know, the whole concept of prefigurative politics is a certain vision of transition. It's a very strong vision of transition, which is different. It has an inbuilt idea of like exit from communism by way of this, what Viktor Kulevsky called the steady shattering of bonds. So there is no spectacular revolution, but there is also no compromise. There is just kind of the civil society, you know, like kind of growing tentacles, to cut it short, and that vision was a very different vision from the way it actually happened. So if you can read this book in the way of kind of also creating a critical stance towards the narrative of post 89 transition, it is because of this. It's because it's a way of showing that there were multiple visions of transition from communism, and they were coexisting in time, and they were kind of, there was conflict between them, because one of the reasons why there is such a disillusion among this very late Samizdat activists after 89 is precisely because this is not how they imagined the transition to take place, and it's not about kind of right-wing, you know, national uprising. It's actually quite the contrary. They you know, they were thinking about it with more democratic radicalism, and what they did not like is this kind of politics of exceptions that were kind of transforming a very deeply democratic movement into a very, you know, hierarchical machine, which won the elections and later kind of, you know, started to transform the
and before you go to his other questions, does anyone else have a question they want to ask? Because you can take the rest of the time, because I know you can, to answer the others. Other questions for Piotr to sneak in here? I'm just being like hyper controlling moderator. If not, then okay, avanti.
Yeah, I mean, well, the two other questions are just like, for one, I mean, the prime materials are basically well, Samizdat text, even though it's kind of it's there are a couple of considerations here. I was trying. I was not doing oral history, and this is like why, you know, like the, you know, since we are doing home office, I can I have all these books here, like for example this one, or this one, and also sort of this one in a way, and a couple of others. I mean, among Polish Samizdat studies, the oral history is a very big big thing. And as far as and very useful in the sense that you through the oral interviews you learned many new facts just because they were just not, it was not environment that was kind of propensive to, keeping an institutional archive of things, right? So it's kind of sometimes it's like this, and the secret police files is the only way to reconstruct the facts. But and here's my kind of a methodological proposition. I mean, that oral history is not very useful when it comes to studying intellectual history, because you can, by, it's just when people think about their political commitments of the past, they always think about the present, and in this history, which is also a very sad and contentious history of how the post-dissident elite was kind of shattered, and after '89, how they kind of quarreled, and like we are still living under the spell of the internal kind of rivalry within the post-solidarity camp in a way. So this affects the way how the past thoughts are remembered. I mean, not facts, but thought, ideological commitments. So so whenever I could, I was basing on the samizdat sources, not always, of course, and of course, like for the solidarity period, then and for the '89 we have other like non-samizdat. I mean, there is like solidarity has its own official record, but I think my intervention here is that like oral history is great, but not for intellectual historians. That's my
okay.
Long story short.
So we can have a different conversation about that. I wanted to just add that, to me, it's one thing to say you use samizdat, but the next time you describe your sources, you need to talk about all the different types of samizdat that you're reading, because some of it is like the trade union paper, some of it is this classic underground press, some of it is reprinted, translated. So it's actually, if I just think through the number of different kinds of sources I found, it's a very heterogeneous archive that you're reconstructing. But yes, it all gets put under this label of
well, it's very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult, and to, especially when somebody wants to be very scientific and not humanistic about it, because it's not, of course, like all the stories not kind of based on a representative sample, right? Like kind of something, like what I probably I'm not far from truth of when I say that that there was not like that samizdat was not only a practical thing, it was also an intellectual, it was a culture, right? That people kind of attached a political sense to what they were doing as samizdat activists, and I was really interested in reconstructing that. And there are good reasons to believe that at some of the moments in this history, that was kind of a much more mainstream understanding of the role of samizdat or the like unlicensed press activism. But at the same time, you can also tell that like some of the people were clearly which were active in the samizdat were clearly thinking differently. They were just like kind of anti-communist at large, or they were invested in very specific ideologies that were capacity as samizdat activists was not the most important thing for them, right? And I'm explicitly following the voices of people for whom their capacity as samizdat, like the animators or activists of the samizdat print culture, was an important part of their political identity, rather than being socialist or kind of right-wing people or solidarity members or and so on and so forth.
Well, I think we're supposed to wrap it up now, but that actually answers Petra's question and call to Miro, who is here somewhere. I saw him come in virtually. But since you just said it explicitly, Piotr, that would focus your study on the people with the samizdat identity, as you call it, in your book, and not necessarily those in associational life, civic life, parallel polis types of activities like fanzine cultures or other kinds of cultural formations outside of the expressly samizdat identified. So does either Miro or Piotr want to address the question of whether fanzines could be seen as more like another branch of social media, or do the organizers need us to like wrap it up here? I'll let them answer.
It's a complicated question.
Yeah. Miro, are you here? No, he might not be available for comment. Oh, he is.
Yes.
Ahoy, how are you?
Hi. I just have to also do something else, and I'm just listening. I was wondering if I should turn the discussion towards the fanzines, because I really appreciated what you were talking about, but in the same time, I'm still really I'm still not really sure if we should to talk about samizdat and fanzine as a one community. You know, that's maybe a big difference. No, it's not about practices, how to build up the community and what to do within the community, but I think that that's maybe there are not the similar interests if we are talking about this kind of classical way of.
I just want to intervene in one sense, in that when we use the term social media to refer to present activities, it's absurd too, because you have your fanzine cultures and your hardcore, cultural formations that are entirely organized around one phenomenon in that world. And then you have like the Twitterverse talking about Trump, right? So why we call that all social media, I don't know. It's really lazy. So why not just use those distinctions more carefully in both contexts? Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, it just depends on what you are trying to say. I mean, if you take how do you call it, like an emic, right? Emic perspective. I mean, what the anthropologists call within like trying to use the categories that as they come within the group. And that would be, for example, Padre Kenny's perspective in the Carnival of the Revolution, or among the Polish scholars, Przemysław Czapliński. They all put great emphasis on how the fanzine culture that emerged in the late 80s is different from the mainstream solidarity, and because this is how these young activists saw their relationship. They were treating them as this kind of boring veteran people, and in the way, and they were thinking about themselves as the kind of the third. Like if you have the second circulation, then this would be the third circulation, which is also a very funny story, because there are two kind of the other way. Samizdat activists were using third circulation also to refer to the black market for books, which is the Egyptian dream books, the porno books, the illegal copies of textbooks. This was their kind of enemy. But anyways, coming back to the fanzine story, I was particularly curious about how Przemysław Czapliński, who is like kind of one of the foremost scholars of Polish literature, put this, and he shows that there is this solidarity mainstream, which is this wrapped in pathos, and they don't really like the avant-garde. They are just kind of boring moral people, and then you have this deeply participatory culture that embraces the other in form of the fanzine, and this is the culture that's getting the alternative culture that is getting lost that loses in the 90s. And funny thing is that I wrote Przemysław Czapliński's narrative pretty late, and this is more or less how I pictured I think this is what samizdat print culture was about. So if I would be writing more about fanzines, I think there was a similar kind of joint spirit. But if I would take an emic perspective, I would have to acknowledge that there was this cleavage between the fanzine community and the mainstream political opposition. But it's important to say here that many people who put their samizdat identities first were also distancing themselves from the political dissent, because in the late 80s in general you had a very it was a moment of reckoning. And then we can consider all the we didn't talk anything about the materiality of samizdat, which is also a topic in my book, and then you should that would bring a third layer of discussion.
It's true. That was the missing point. Should we wrap it up here?
Yeah, if there are not any other questions, I would like to thank you for the intriguing Yes.
I would, before we conclude, Petra told me to introduce our network, and I didn't do it in the beginning, in the introduction. So just a brief announcement that this interview and this wonderful evening is also a part of the activities of our network under acronym of NEP for Dissent, which means New Exploratory Phase in Research on East European Cultures of Dissent. It's a networking project, which obviously under current situation is busy reinventing itself online. So if you want, you can follow our website, where we've been announcing this wonderful lecture and interview series, and we'll be announcing other events relevant to the topic of cultural resistance and dissent, very broadly conceived. So I think that's that.
Yes, so thank you very much, and please join us next month for the discussion in the opposite way.
Okay.
Well, we'll see how that goes.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you so much, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much too, and see you in April.
Bye.
Bye.